February 22, 2026. Tapalpa, Jalisco, Mexico. A military helicopter descends. What happens in the next few minutes will change the balance of organized crime across an entire continent. Mexican army soldiers storm a location in the mountains of Jalisco. Gunfire erupts. 4 cartel members are killed on the spot. 3 others are wounded, including one man the Mexican government has been hunting for over a decade. One man the United States has been hunting even longer. One man who carried a $15 million bounty on his head and whose face was so rarely photographed that most people had never seen what he actually looked like. Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes, known to the world as El Mencho. He is wounded and detained. He is placed aboard a helicopter and transported toward Mexico City. He does not survive the journey. At 59 years old, the founder and undisputed leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the most powerful drug trafficking organization in Mexico, and one of the most powerful in the world, is dead. Within hours, Mexico burns. Roads across 20 states are blocked. More than 250 barricades appear simultaneously across the country. Vehicles are set on fire. Guadalajara, a city of 5 million people and a host city for the upcoming FIFA World Cup, becomes a ghost town. Travelers sprint through airports in panic. Smoke rises over the beachfront hotels of Puerto Vallarta. Schools are canceled. The U.S. Embassy tells American citizens to shelter in place. 25 members of Mexico's National Guard are killed in retaliatory attacks. This is what the death of one man looks like. This is the story of how El Mencho became that man, how he was found, how he died, and what comes next for a cartel that has no clear successor and no intention of disappearing. Before we go deep into the operation that ended the most wanted drug lord in the Western Hemisphere and what it actually means for the war on fentanyl, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. Here at the Investigation Room, we don't cover stories like this for shock value. We follow the evidence, trace the timelines, and examine what's actually happening beneath the surface of the news cycle. We give every case the depth and honesty it deserves. New, in-depth documentaries every week. If this story matters to you, if you want to understand not just what happened, but why it happened now, and what comes next, hit that like button. It helps this channel reach people who are looking for serious analysis in a world full of noise. And tell me in the comments, do you believe El Mencho's death will weaken the CJNG, or does it make them more dangerous? Now, let's start from the beginning. To understand what happened in Tapalpa on February 22, 2026, you have to understand where Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes came from. He was born on July 17, 1966, in a rural community called Culotitlan, in the municipality of Aguililla, in the western state of Michoacán. Aguililla sits in a region known as the Tierra Caliente, the Hot Land. It is one of the most historically impoverished and most criminally contested regions of Mexico. Avocado farming, subsistence agriculture, and organized crime have long existed side by side in this landscape. El Mencho grew up in poverty. He dropped out of primary school. As a young man, he grew avocados, the same crop that would later make Michoacán one of the most contested territories in Mexico's cartel wars. He had no formal education, no inherited influence, no family dynasty in the criminal world. What he had was ambition, and a willingness to operate in spaces where other people would not. He immigrated illegally to the United States at some point in his early adult life. In California, he became involved in drug trafficking. In 1994, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California sentenced him to 3 years in federal prison for conspiracy to distribute heroin. He was deported back to Mexico after serving his sentence. That deportation is where the trajectory shifts. Back in Mexico, Oseguera Cervantes did not retreat from criminal activity. He did something that would define the next 3 decades of his life. He went deeper. He became a police officer in Jalisco, a position that in the corridors of organized crime provided cover, intelligence, and contacts that a civilian could never access. He did not remain in law enforcement for long. His criminal associations were identified, and he resigned or was removed from the force. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, he had attached himself to one of Mexico's most powerful criminal structures. He worked in a unit of hitmen that protected Armando Valencia Cornelio, known as El Maradona, a powerful figure in Michoacan's criminal landscape. From there he moved upward, aligning with Ignacio Coronel Villarreal, known as Nacho Coronel, a senior leader within the Sinaloa cartel based in Jalisco. He was not yet a boss. He was a lieutenant, a capable and violent one. He was also a man who understood the value of strategic marriage. In the early 2000s, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes married Rosalinda González Valencia. Her brother was Abigail González Valencia, the leader of Los Quines, a family-based criminal organization from Michoacán that would become the financial and logistical backbone of an empire neither of them had yet built. Security analyst David Saucedo would later summarize it clearly. El Mencho reached the cartel's highest levels through a strategy of diplomacy via marriage. He was the chief enforcer. His wife's family provided the lineage, the money networks, and the institutional reach. Together, they were the foundation of something that did not yet exist. By 2010, that was about to change. In 2010, the criminal architecture of Western Mexico fractures. Nacho Coronel, El Mencho's patron within the Sinaloa cartel structure, is killed by Mexican army forces in Guadalajara on July 29th. That death removes the organizing figure around which an entire regional operation had been built. Simultaneously, Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia, the leader of the Milenio cartel, the structure under which El Mencho and others had been operating, is captured by Mexican authorities. The Milenio cartel splinters. Two factions emerge almost immediately. One calls itself Los Torcidos, the other, La Resistencia. They begin fighting each other for control of drug trafficking routes through Jalisco and the surrounding states. Los Torcidos win, and Los Torcidos, by approximately 2011, become what the world will come to know as the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG, with El Mencho at its head. What follows is one of the most rapid expansions of criminal power in modern Mexican history. The CJNG does not operate the way older cartels did. It does not try to avoid confrontation with the state. It courts it. It treats military aggression not as something to evade, but as something to answer, with equal or greater force. From its earliest years, the CJNG demonstrates a willingness to directly attack the institutions of the Mexican government that no cartel had done with such consistency or public visibility. In August 2012, Mexican security forces launch an operation targeting the CJNG in Guadalajara. El Mencho is not captured. Instead, cartel members form dozens of vehicle barricades across the city, setting fire to cars on major roads throughout Guadalajara to create chaos and buy time for their leaders to escape. It is the first major public demonstration of the CJNG's capacity for citywide disruption. It will not be the last. By 2015, the U.S. Treasury Department formally designates El Mencho as a sanctioned drug lord. In March 2014, he had already been indicted in U.S. federal court in Washington, D.C. on charges of criminal association, cocaine and methamphetamine trafficking, and illegal weapons possession. The indictments continue to accumulate over the following decade. By 2022, he faces additional charges in the United States for conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl for importation into the United States. The DEA by 2019 estimates that the CJNG is responsible for at least 1/3 of all drugs entering the United States through air and sea routes. Former DEA agent Matthew Donahue states publicly that El Mencho is the #1 priority for the DEA and for federal law enforcement in the United States. The U.S. State Department raises its reward for information leading to his arrest to $15 million, and yet El Mencho remains free. Part of the reason is by design. Unlike cartel leaders who cultivated public profiles, who appeared in narco corridos and social media videos, who sought to project personal fame alongside criminal power, El Mencho maintained an almost total absence from public visibility. Only a handful of photographs of him existed, and most were decades old. He moved constantly. He avoided electronic communications wherever possible. He built an organization structured to function without his direct daily command. His health was also, for years, a subject of speculation. In 2020, reports emerged that El Mencho suffered from kidney disease so serious that he had constructed a small hospital in the village of El Alcihuatl, specifically to treat it. By 2022, Insight Crime reported that he had not been seen publicly in years. Rumors of his death circulated in the Mexican press more than once. In February 2022, several outlets reported he had been killed in a cartel confrontation. Others claimed kidney failure had taken him in a Guadalajara hospital. None of it was true. He was still alive, still in command, still protected by an organization that, from 2018 to 2020 alone, committed 298 reported acts of gang-related violence, more than any other cartel in Mexico. Then, in the years leading up to 2026, the circle around El Mencho begins to close. In December 2022, his brother Antonio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Tony Montana, is arrested by the Mexican army in Guadalajara. Authorities identify him as a logistics operator for the CJNG, supplying weapons, laundering money, and coordinating attacks on rival cartels. In February 2027, Antonio is extradited to the United States. In 2020, El Mencho's son, Rubén Oseguera González, known as El Menchito, had already been extradited to the United States, where he is serving a prison sentence. With his son in U.S. custody, El Mencho's line of succession is broken at its most natural point. In November 2024, El Mencho's son-in-law, Cristian Fernando Gutierrez Ochoa, a high-ranking CJNG leader who had faked his own death and fled to Riverside, California under an assumed identity, is arrested by U.S. agents. El Mencho himself had reportedly told associates that he had killed his son-in-law for lying, an elaborate cover story to protect someone who was, in reality, hiding in plain sight in Southern California. On February 28, 2025, El Mencho's older brother Abraham, known as Don Rodo, regarded as one of the CJNG's founding figures and its primary money laundering operator, is recaptured by Mexican authorities in Jalisco. By early 2026, every senior member of El Mencho's family circle that investigators could identify is either dead, imprisoned in Mexico, or serving sentences in the United States. He is increasingly isolated, increasingly ill, and increasingly visible to the intelligence apparatus closing in on him. February 22, 2026. Tapalpa, Jalisco, a mountain town approximately 1 hour south of Guadalajara. Population, roughly 7,000 people. The Mexican army, acting on intelligence that the United States government later confirms it provided directly, moves on a specific location in Tapalpa. The operation is coordinated through the Joint Interagency Task Force Counter Cartel, a standing bilateral structure through which the U.S. Northern Command regularly works with the Mexican military. A U.S. defense official later confirms American military participation, while emphasizing that this was a Mexican military operation. Troops reach the location. They come under fire immediately. 4 CJNG members are killed at the scene. El Mencho is wounded. He and 2 others are detained and placed aboard transport heading to Mexico City. During that transfer, the convoy comes under attack again. The military returns fire. 3 of those being transported die of their injuries. One of them is Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes. El Mencho is dead. It is approximately mid-afternoon on February 22, 2026, when the Mexican Secretariat of National Defense confirms it publicly. Within minutes, Mexico begins to burn. The details of the February 22 operation are still emerging. But what has been confirmed by multiple government sources on both sides of the border tells a specific story about how an organization like the CJNG responds when its central figure is eliminated. The Mexican Defense Secretariat states that the raid in Tapalpa was carried out with, in their words, complimentary information from U.S. authorities. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirms in a statement Sunday night that the United States provided intelligence support to the Mexican government for the operation. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau describes El Mencho as one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins and calls his death a great development for Mexico, the United States, Latin America, and the world. The operation results in 4 cartel members killed at the location. 3 members of the Mexican armed forces are wounded and receive medical treatment. Armored vehicles, rocket launchers, and additional weapons are seized from the site. El Mencho, wounded at the scene, dies during transport to Mexico City. The Mexican Defense Ministry is explicit. He died of injuries suffered in the firefight during his transfer. What follows over the next several hours is, by any measure, extraordinary. CJNG members coordinate a simultaneous nationwide response. More than 250 roadblocks appear across 20 Mexican states within hours of the death announcement. Vehicles are set on fire. Businesses close. Public transportation is suspended. Residents throughout Jalisco, Colima, Michoacán, Nayarit, Guanajuato, and Tamaulipas receive instructions or implied threats to stay home. Guadalajara, a city of over 5 million people, a venue for the upcoming 2026 FIFA World Cup, becomes a ghost town. Videos circulate on social media showing travelers sprinting through Guadalajara's international airport. Smoke rises above Puerto Vallarta's beachfront hotel district. The U.S. Embassy issues formal shelter-in-place advisories for American citizens in multiple Mexican states. Security analyst Gerardo Rodriguez tells AFP that authorities had anticipated a reaction from CJNG following any leadership strike, but that no one expected the national reach of what actually occurred. By Monday, Mexican authorities confirm at least 25 National Guard members are dead in Jalisco alone, killed in 6 separate coordinated attacks. A prison guard is killed in Puerto Vallarta when detained cartel members riot. A state prosecutor's agent is killed in Guadalajara. The total death toll from retaliatory violence in the 24 hours following El Mencho's death includes at least 14 civilians and security personnel across Jalisco, Michoacán, and Guanajuato, with confirmed National Guard casualties pushing the figure significantly higher. This response, prepared, coordinated, and executed within hours, tells investigators something important. The CJNG's command and communication infrastructure was not disabled by the removal of El Mencho. The organization had contingency protocols in place. It responded in the immediate term as a functioning organization. How did Mexican and American intelligence services locate El Mencho in Tapalpa? The specific intelligence methods used have not been publicly disclosed, and they are unlikely to be fully revealed. What is known is that the U.S. Joint Interagency Task Force Counter-Cartel has been an active partner with the Mexican military for years, and that El Mencho's deteriorating health, the kidney disease that had been reported as far back as 2020, may have been a factor in narrowing his possible locations. A person requiring serious medical treatment cannot move with unlimited freedom. The isolation of his family network over the preceding years, his son in U.S. custody since 2020, his brother Abraham in Mexican custody since 2025, his son-in-law arrested in California in 2024, his brother Antonio extradited in early 2025, reduced the number of trusted intermediaries through whom El Mencho could operate. Fewer trusted people means fewer secure channels. Fewer secure channels means more exposure. Whether the final intelligence came from a human source, a technical collection method, or a combination of both, has not been confirmed. What is confirmed is that the operation was precise. It located a man who had successfully evaded the combined intelligence resources of 2 governments for over a decade. The death of El Mencho immediately raises a question that analysts, governments, and security experts are actively debating. What does this actually change? The first position holds that El Mencho's death represents a genuine and lasting disruption to the CJNG's capacity and to the flow of fentanyl and methamphetamine into the United States. In this view, El Mencho was not simply a figurehead. He was, as Al Jazeera's correspondent described him, the undisputed head of the CJNG, and the most powerful Mexican drug trafficking figure that was free in the country. Security analyst Mike Vigil, a former DEA official, puts it directly. El Mencho controlled everything. He was like a country's dictator. This theory points to the succession problem. El Mencho's son, El Menchito, is imprisoned in the United States. His stepson, Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as El Pelon, is considered by the U.S. Director of National Intelligence's National Counterterrorism Center as the de facto second in command. But analysts note that El Pelon lacks influence among other cartel commanders. The line of succession has been broken at its most natural point. The family structure that provided both legitimacy and trust within the organization is now absent from the leadership position. Proponents of this view also point to what the CJNG's retaliatory response reveals. The organization acted immediately and broadly, which suggests operational capacity, but it also suggests a degree of panic rather than strategy. A cartel operating from a position of strength does not typically torch 250 vehicles in 20 states within hours of a single event. The second position, and the one that many Mexico-focused analysts currently favor, holds that El Mencho's death will not significantly dismantle the CJNG. It will fragment it, and fragmentation may make the cartel more dangerous in the short to medium term, not less. The DEA itself describes the CJNG's organizational structure not as a centralized hierarchy, but as a franchise model. The cartel is composed of approximately 90 semi-autonomous organizations operating under the CJNG brand and in alignment with its broader interests. It has a presence in at least 21 of Mexico's 32 states and maintains active networks across almost all of the United States. Eduardo Guerrero, director of the Mexican consulting group Lantia Intelligence, makes the point explicitly. This fragmentation has meant that a more complex, more sophisticated strategy is needed to weaken and dismantle the organization. Simply removing the top does not collapse a structure that was never fully centralized to begin with. Mexico City security consultant David Saucedo identifies 4 or 5 senior CJNG commanders as the most likely candidates to emerge as the next leader. Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, known as El Doble R, Audias Flores, known as El Jardinero, Hugo Mendoza Gaitan, known as El Sapo, and a fourth figure, El Mencho's former head of security, about whom very little is publicly known. Each of these individuals leads their own network. None has the unifying authority that El Mencho held. The transition, Saucedo suggests, will not produce a single clear successor. It will produce a period of competition, and competition within a cartel of this size and firepower tends to produce violence. A third framework centers not on the operational future of the CJNG, but on the political context in which this operation was executed. El Mencho's death occurs at a very specific moment in the U.S.-Mexico relationship. Since the return of Donald Trump to the White House in January 2025, the Mexican government under President Claudia Sheinbaum has been under sustained and public pressure to demonstrate action against drug cartels. The Trump administration designated the CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization in February 2025, eliminating the most wanted figure in that designated organization. With U.S. intelligence support is precisely the kind of result that both governments had an interest in producing. Sheinbaum has, since taking office, been more militarily aggressive against criminal organizations than her predecessor. The operation in Tapalpa reflects that posture. International Crisis Group analyst David Mora notes that the army under Sheinbaum has been significantly more confrontational and combative against criminal groups. This theory does not contradict either of the first two frameworks. It adds a layer to both. The political incentives on both sides of the border aligned around this outcome. The intelligence and operational infrastructure was in place. The moment was chosen. What remains genuinely uncertain is whether the political achievement and the operational disruption are equal in scale, or whether the symbolic victory is significantly larger than the practical one. Analysts are not in agreement. The evidence supports multiple readings simultaneously. A death like this does not happen in isolation. It happens in a context shaped by decades of decisions, some effective, some deeply flawed, about how to confront organized crime in Mexico and how the United States engages with that effort. President Sheinbaum herself has been publicly critical of what analysts call the kingpin strategy, the approach favored by multiple previous Mexican governments and supported by the United States, that prioritizes the arrest or elimination of top cartel leaders above broader structural dismantlement. The record of this strategy is genuinely mixed. In 2016, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the most famous drug lord in Mexican history and the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was captured for the final time, extradited to the United States, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. The Sinaloa cartel did not collapse. It fragmented, and that fragmentation produced an internal conflict between El Chapo's sons and the faction loyal to Ismael El Mayo Zambada, that, as of early 2026, is still generating significant violence. The concern that security analysts raise about El Mencho's death is structurally identical. The CJNG, like the Sinaloa cartel before it, is not a personality-dependent organization. It is a network of networks, with financial infrastructure, territorial control, distribution systems, and enforcement capacity that exist independently of who sits at the top. Removing the head creates chaos in the short term. That chaos is visible. It was visible within hours of El Mencho's death. But chaos in an organization of this size and reach is not the same as collapse. History suggests it is often a precursor to reorganization. The political framing of El Mencho's death in Washington centers heavily on fentanyl. The Trump administration, consistent with its stated foreign policy priorities, presents the operation as a blow to the drug supply chain responsible for tens of thousands of American deaths each year. That framing is factually grounded in one respect. The CJNG is among the primary organizations responsible for manufacturing and distributing fentanyl into the United States. The DEA has documented the cartel's role in synthetic drug production extensively. But the structural critique applies here as well. Fentanyl manufacturing infrastructure, the precursor chemical supply chains from China, the laboratory networks in Sinaloa and Jalisco, the distribution corridors through border states, does not disappear with the death of its most senior executive. It transfers to whoever consolidates control of those networks. The elimination of El Mencho may slow certain operations in the short term. It may produce a period of uncertainty as successor factions compete. But analysts who study drug supply chains closely are cautious about claims that this represents a turning point in the fentanyl crisis. It is worth acknowledging what the operation in Tapalpa represents as a piece of intelligence and military work. Finding El Mencho was genuinely difficult. He maintained almost total operational silence for years. His family network, the people who would normally provide the threads investigators follow, had been systematically dismantled over 5 years of coordinated effort. His health had forced him to rely on medical infrastructure that created vulnerabilities. And still, he avoided capture for over a decade after becoming the most wanted man in Mexico. The operation that found him was, by the available evidence, precise, well-coordinated, and executed under significant risk. 3 members of the Mexican armed forces were wounded. The convoy carrying him was attacked during transport. People died in this operation on both sides. The criticism of the kingpin strategy is systemic and structural. It is a critique of a framework, not of the individual soldiers and intelligence analysts who executed a specific and dangerous mission. The death of El Mencho lands at a moment when the narco-state tension in Mexico is, in some respects, more internationally visible than at any point in recent history. Guadalajara, the city that CJNG built its empire in and around, is scheduled to host matches at the 2026 FIFA World Cup, a tournament being shared between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The images of a ghost town in Guadalajara on the night of February 22nd, the airport footage, the burning vehicles on streets that will soon host millions of international visitors, reached an audience that was already primed to watch Mexico's security situation closely. That global visibility creates pressure in both directions. It creates pressure on the Mexican government to demonstrate that the country is stable enough to host a global sporting event, and it creates pressure on CJNG's successor structure to reassert territorial control quickly, to demonstrate that the cartel remains a force that cannot simply be erased. The families of the 25 National Guard members killed in retaliatory attacks are living the consequences of this operation in ways that no policy framework adequately addresses. These were men and women in uniform who died not in the operation that killed El Mencho, but in the wave of violence that followed it. Their deaths are inseparable from the decision to pursue a kingpin strategy whose aftermath was, by the evidence, anticipated by security analysts if not fully predicted in its geographic scale. The conversation this death demands about what replacing El Mencho with the same system that produced him looks like, about what fentanyl demand in the United States drives on the supply side in Mexico, about what sustainable security actually requires, is harder and slower than the political moment allows. It will need to happen anyway. As of February 23, 2026, the situation across Mexico remains volatile. The U.S. Embassy in Mexico continues to advise American citizens to shelter in place in the states of Jalisco, Tamaulipas, Michoacán, Guerrero, and Nuevo León. Rideshare and taxi services in Puerto Vallarta remain suspended. Some domestic and international flights from Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta have been canceled due to road blockades affecting airport access. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has applauded the security forces involved in the operation and called publicly for calm. Jalisco Governor Pablo Lemos has instructed residents to stay home and suspended public transportation in the state capital. The question of succession within the CJNG is now the most consequential open question in Mexican organized crime. Security analyst David Saucedo identifies 4 or 5 senior commanders as the most likely candidates to emerge: El Doble R, El Jardinero, El Sapo, and El Mencho's former head of security, El Pelón, El Mencho's stepson and the figure identified by the U.S. Director of National Intelligence as the de facto second-in-command, lacks the command authority among senior CJNG figures that a clean succession would require. The U.S. government has not yet announced any formal change in its threat designation or its operational posture regarding the CJNG following El Mencho's death. The cartel remains a designated foreign terrorist organization. The DEA's assessment that the CJNG operates as a franchise structure of approximately 90 organizations is unchanged. El Mencho's wife, Rosalinda González Valencia, through whom he initially built his influence in the CJNG, was arrested by Mexican authorities in 2022. She was released from prison in February 2025. Her current status and any continued influence within the organization has not been reported. The broader investigation into CJNG's financial and logistical infrastructure continues across multiple jurisdictions, in Mexico, in the United States, and internationally. Several of El Mencho's family members remain in custody on both sides of the border. The story of the CJNG after El Mencho is only beginning. Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes was 59 years old. He was born into poverty in rural Michoacán. He dropped out of primary school. He grew avocados. He crossed a border illegally and served prison time in a foreign country. He was deported. He became a police officer. He became a hitman. He became a boss. He built one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the history of the Western Hemisphere. He was the most wanted man in Mexico. He carried a $15 million bounty from the United States. He had been indicted multiple times in U.S. federal courts. He orchestrated the trafficking of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine into the United States at scale. Under his command, the CJNG killed thousands of people: civilians, journalists, politicians, soldiers, and anyone else who stood in its path. He evaded capture for over a decade after becoming the most wanted figure on 2 governments' lists. On February 22, 2026, in the mountains above a small town in Jalisco, the Mexican army found him. He did not survive, and within hours of his death, 25 National Guard members were killed in retaliatory attacks. A country that had been living under the weight of his organization's power for 15 years watched its cities fill with smoke on a Sunday night. The The question that now falls to Mexico, to the United States, and to every analyst and policymaker watching this moment is whether the architecture that produced El Mencho, the poverty, the institutional corruption, the drug demand on the northern side of the border, the franchise model that now operates without him, is something that the elimination of one man, however significant, can actually change. El Mencho is dead. The CJNG is not. Between 40 and 90 criminal organizations continue to operate under its banner across more than 20 Mexican states and through networks active in almost every part of the United States. No clear successor has emerged. A power struggle is likely. And power struggles in organizations of this size and firepower have a consistent historical pattern. They produce violence, not stability. What do you believe comes next? Does El Mencho's death weaken the CJNG long-term? Or does the fragmentation that follows make the organization more dangerous? And what does this operation tell us about the future of the war on fentanyl? Share your analysis respectfully in the comments below. If this investigation has given you a deeper understanding of what actually happened and what it means, make sure to subscribe to the Investigation Room and hit that notification bell. We are committed to examining these cases with the seriousness and depth they deserve. We do not cover stories like this for shock value. We cover them because the decisions made in rooms in Washington and Mexico City, in military operations in mountain towns in Jalisco, and in cartel succession battles that have not yet concluded, will shape the lives of millions of people who had no part in creating this system. These are real people, real deaths, and real consequences that extend far beyond the headlines. Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes is dead. The investigation into what comes next has already begun. This investigation was presented with respect for all victims of cartel violence, the thousands of ordinary people across Mexico and the United States whose lives have been taken or permanently altered by the organization El Mencho built. Our goal is to examine the evidence and search for truth, not to sensationalize tragedy. Thank you for approaching this story with the gravity it deserves.